You're going to rot in here. The only way you're leaving is feet first." My own son's words stabbed at my ears like daggers as he violently shoved me inside the old lake house. The sound of the telephone shattering against the wooden floor was the last thing I heard before the lock turned from the outside. Michael had destroyed my only connection to the outside world, and now I was completely alone. No food, no water, abandoned like an animal in a cage. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. At 66 years old, after giving my entire life for that ungrateful son, I was locked away by his own hands, condemned to die of thirst and hunger while he went off to enjoy a luxury cruise with Claire, his wife, and that horrible mother-in-law who manipulated him so much. But let me tell you how I got here. How the woman who was once the center of a happy family ended up a prisoner of her own blood. My name is Eleanor, and for 40 years, I believed I had built a solid family, full of love and sacrifice. I worked from the age of 18 as a seamstress in a small textile factory downtown. My hands, rough from so much sewing and embroidering, supported our home after my husband left us, when Michael was just 8 years old. From that moment on, he became my reason for living, the engine that drove me to get up before dawn every morning to get to work on time. I remember perfectly the day I decided I would do anything to give my son the life he deserved. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and Michael came home from school crying because the other kids were making fun of his torn shoes. That night, while he slept, I counted every single dollar I had saved for months to buy myself a new dress money. I immediately set aside to buy him the best sneakers in the store. Seeing his smile the next day was worth more than any piece of clothing I could have ever bought for myself. And so the years went by. Every extra dollar, every hour of overtime, every moment of rest I sacrificed, it was all for him. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he wanted so badly. At 21, I mortgaged my small house to pay for his engineering degree at the state university. I never complained, never held it against him. I firmly believed that a mother should give everything for her children, expecting nothing in return but their love and respect. Michael graduated with honors and got an excellent job at a construction firm. I felt like the proudest woman in the world watching him leave for work each morning in his smart suit and leather briefcase. My son is a successful professional. I would tell my neighbors with a smile that came from my soul. During those first few years after his graduation, our relationship seemed perfect. He visited me regularly, took me out to nice restaurants, and always told me how grateful he was for all my sacrifices. Everything changed when he met Claire. The first time he introduced her to me, something inside me recoiled. It wasn't just her cold, calculating demeanor, but the way she looked at my son, as if he were an investment to be protected from outside influences. Claire was a 32-year-old woman, tall, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She worked as an administrator at a private clinic and made it clear from the very beginning that she considered Michael's family, specifically me, to be beneath her social standards. During the first few months of their relationship, I tried to get close to her. I cooked her favorite meals when they came to visit, bought her little gifts with my meager savings. I even learned to cook sophisticated dishes I knew she liked. But every gesture of love from me was met with a fake smile and sarcastic comments that my son either didn't seem to notice or, even worse, chose to ignore. "Eleanor, don't go to so much trouble," Claire would say in that syrupy voice that set my teeth on edge. "We don't need you to do all this. We're not children anymore." But I could see the disdain in her eyes, the contempt for the old woman who had raised the man she now considered her property. The wedding took place 2 years after they met, in an elegant hall that cost over $20,000. I, who had dreamed for years of the day my son would get married, felt like a stranger in my own family. Claire had organized everything without consulting me, from the guest list to the color of the flowers. When I tried to suggest that perhaps we could include some family traditions that had been important to us, she looked at me as if I had suggested something utterly ridiculous. "Eleanor, dear," she said with that condescension I was beginning to recognize, "this is a modern celebration. I don't think our guests would appreciate those antiquated customs." Michael, who used to defend me from any slight, simply nodded and changed the subject. On the day of the wedding, I sat in the front row wearing a green dress I had bought at a discount store, feeling small and invisible as I watched my son promise forever to a woman who had already begun to push me away. During the ceremony, when the officiant spoke about the importance of family and respect for one's parents, I saw Claire squeeze Michael's hand with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. That night, while clearing the dishes from the small dinner I had hosted at my house for our closest relatives, I overheard a conversation between Claire and her mother in the backyard. "Now that we're married, we need to set some clear boundaries," Claire was saying, in a voice I had never heard her use in front of me. "Michael is too soft with his mother. She thinks she can keep controlling his life. But those days are over." "You're right, darling," her mother replied with a cruel laugh. "Men need their wives to open their eyes about these things. A meddling mother-in-law can ruin a marriage before it even starts." I stood frozen behind the window, each word feeling like a slap in the face. The woman for whom I had made so much effort, whom I had tried to love like a daughter, was already plotting to cut me out of my own son's life. I finished cleaning the kitchen in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks, wondering if Michael knew what his new wife really thought of me, or if he had simply chosen to ignore it to keep the peace in his marriage. That night, for the first time in years, I went to bed with an emptiness in my chest that I didn't know how to fill. The following months confirmed my worst fears. Michael's visits became more and more sporadic, and when he did come, it was always with Claire, and for shorter and shorter periods. The conversations that once flowed so naturally between us became tense and superficial, constantly interrupted by subtle but hurtful comments from his wife. "Michael, don't forget we have that dinner with my parents," Claire would say whenever my son seemed to be enjoying our conversation. Or, even worse, "Honey, your mother looks tired. Maybe we should go so she can rest." As if I were a decrepit old woman who needed to be cared for instead of a vibrant woman who simply wanted to spend time with her son. But what hurt the most was seeing how Michael had begun to change. The loving, considerate son I had raised was transforming into someone distant, someone who seemed ashamed of his humble beginnings and of the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. The first time Michael spoke to me with contempt was on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after his wedding. I had prepared his favorite meal, the same pot roast he had loved since he was a child, and I was eagerly awaiting his weekly visit. When he arrived, he was alone, which filled me with hope that we would finally have some quality time, just mother and son. But something in his eyes had changed. He was no longer the affectionate young man who would hug me at the door, but a stranger who greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek and sat at the table as if fulfilling an annoying obligation. "Mom, we need to talk," he said as I served the steaming pot roast onto his favorite plate, the same ceramic plate decorated with red flowers that I had bought to celebrate his 16th birthday. "Claire and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if we started to have more space." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Space? What does that mean, honey?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. "It means your constant visits are affecting our marriage," he replied, without even looking me in the eye, focused on stirring his food as if it were the most important task in the world. "Claire feels like we don't have enough privacy as a couple because I'm always coming over here." I sat down across from him, my legs shaking. "Michael, you only come once a week. How can that affect your marriage?" "I just want to see you, to spend time with you. You're all I have." "That's exactly the problem," he exploded, dropping his fork on the table with a clatter that made the salt shaker jump. "I'm all you have. Don't you realize how smothering that is? I'm 30 years old, Mom. I can't keep being responsible for your happiness." His words were like daggers piercing my heart. The son I had worked day and night for whom I had given up any chance of remaking my life after his father left us, was telling me that I was a burden on his existence. "I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness," I replied, my voice breaking. "I only asked you to love me the way I've always loved you. Is that too much to ask?" "Love shouldn't be a prison," he retorted, repeating words that were clearly not his own, but Claire's. "I need you to understand that I have a new family now, new priorities. I can't keep living to please you." That afternoon, Michael left without finishing the meal I had prepared with so much love. I was left alone in my small kitchen, staring at the full plate of food growing cold, feeling something inside me break forever. For the first time in my life, I wondered if it had been worth sacrificing so much for someone who now saw me as a nuisance. The following weeks were a silent agony. Michael made good on his threat to space out his visits. What had once been a sacred Sunday appointment became sporadic appearances every 2 or 3 weeks, always with Claire and always in a hurry to leave. During those visits, she made sure to control every conversation, interrupting any moment of intimacy between my son and me, with comments about their plans, their trips, their new upper-class friends. "Michael and I are thinking of buying a bigger house," Claire announced during one of those visits, while sipping the coffee I had specially prepared with imported beans that had cost me $30. "Something in the suburbs, in one of those gated communities where there's more security and a better class of people." The way she said "better class of people" while looking directly at me made it clear that I did not fit into that category. Michael, who would have once defended his mother from any implied insult, simply nodded and continued eating the chocolate cake I had baked for him. "And what will happen to this house?" I asked, referring to my home, the place where I had raised my son, where all our memories were. "Well, it's yours, Mom," Michael replied indifferently. "You can do what you want with it. We won't need it anymore." Those words were like a slap. The house he had considered his home for 30 years was now just a place he wanted to get rid of, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past that didn't fit with his new upper-middle-class life. But the worst was yet to come. Just when I thought my relationship with my son had hit rock bottom. Claire had gotten a promotion at the clinic where she worked, and to celebrate, they hosted a dinner at their new house, that modern mansion in the exclusive gated community they boasted so much about. I was not invited. I found out by chance when I called Michael to ask if he could take me to the doctor. I had an irregularity in my routine tests and was scared. "I can't, Mom," he said in a cold voice I didn't recognize. "Claire has an important dinner with people from work. It's very important for her career." "But can't you take me before the dinner?" I insisted, feeling desperation creep in. "It would only be an hour at the clinic. I'm afraid to go alone." "Mom, I need to help Claire get everything ready. Can't you ask one of your friends to take you?" "What friends?" For so many years, I had been so focused on him, on his education, on his well-being, that I had neglected my own social life. Most women my age were busy with their grandchildren, their husbands, with lives they had built more balanced than mine. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for hours, looking at the photographs of Michael that covered the walls. There he was at 5, in his first school uniform that I had washed and ironed so carefully every day. There he was at 12, proudly holding the medal he had won in the math competition, the same competition for which I had paid for extra tutoring by working weekends. There he was at 18, graduating from high school with honors, the day I thought all my sacrifices had been worth it. The next day, I went to the doctor alone. The results were benign, thank God, but the experience of sitting in that waiting room all by myself, surrounded by other women accompanied by their children or husbands, made me feel the deepest loneliness of my life. When I called Michael to give him the good news, his response was a curt, "That's good, Mom," before quickly changing the subject to tell me how successful Claire's dinner had been and how they had impressed all the important guests. It was then that I began to understand that I had lost my son forever. He hadn't died, but the loving, grateful man I had raised no longer existed. In his place was an ambitious stranger who was ashamed of his origins and had chosen a woman who systematically pushed away the mother who had given everything for him. The months passed, and the visits became even scarcer. Michael only showed up when he needed something. For me to store some important documents, to prepare a specific dish to impress Claire's bosses, to lend him money for some unforeseen expense that their new lifestyle demanded. "Mom, could you lend me $5,000? He asked during one of his rare visits. "It's for a down payment on a new car. Claire's broke down and she needs something more elegant for her job." $5,000 was almost all of my savings, the money I had saved penny by penny over the years in case of a medical emergency or a major home repair. But, as always, I couldn't say no to my son. "Of course, honey," I replied, my heart sinking. "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow would be perfect," he said with a smile that for a moment reminded me of the sweet boy he used to be. "I promise I'll pay you back in 3 months." That promise was never kept. Every time I mentioned the loan, Michael had a new excuse. Unexpected expenses for the new house, a work trip Claire needed to take, car repairs that had ended up being more expensive than planned. The day I hit bottom was a gray Tuesday in November, exactly 8 months after the loan he never repaid. I had been fighting a terrible flu for a week, with a high fever and a cough that tore at my chest. My 66-year-old body no longer responded as it used to, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly vulnerable and frightened. I called Michael, hoping he could take me to the doctor again, or at least spend a little time with me to make sure I was okay. His response froze me to the bone. "Mom, I can't come. Claire and I have a very important appointment with the architect to remodel the kitchen. It took us months to get an appointment with him. He's the most sought after in the city." "Michael, please," I begged, my voice hoarse with fever. "I just need someone with me for a few hours. I feel really sick and I'm afraid I might faint." "Can't you call a neighbor or something?" he replied with an irritation that pierced me like a dagger. "Claire says that independent adults should know how to take care of themselves without constantly depending on others." Claire says. Those 2 words had become the most painful phrase in my vocabulary. Everything my son thought, decided, or felt now passed through the filter of that woman who had managed to turn my loving boy into a cruel stranger. "I'm your mother, Michael," I said, tears mixing with the fever. "Since when am I others to you?" "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just a flu. Have some tea and rest. You'll get over it." He hung up without even saying goodbye. I stood there holding the phone for several minutes, feeling something inside me die for good. The son for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my money, my dreams, my chances at love, had reduced me to an annoyance that interfered with his important appointments. That night, as I lay in my bed shivering with fever and feeling more alone than ever, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I could no longer be the pleading mother, the woman begging for scraps of attention and affection from a son who clearly despised me. I had to find a way to reclaim my dignity, even if it meant losing my relationship with Michael for good. It took me 2 full weeks to recover from the flu. During that entire time, my phone remained silent. Michael didn't call a single time to ask how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if I was even alive. It was my neighbor Betty, a 70-year-old widow who lived next door, who took care of me. She brought me medicine, made me hot soup, and sat with me during the toughest nights. "Eleanor," Betty said to me one afternoon, while helping me change my sweat-soaked sheets, "it's not normal for a son to abandon his sick mother like this. Something is very wrong here." She was right, but admitting it meant facing a truth I had been avoiding for months. My son had become a heartless person, and I had been complicit in that transformation by allowing him to treat me worse and worse without setting any boundaries. When I finally recovered, I decided it was time to act. If Michael wanted to treat me like a stranger, then so be it. I would no longer be the smothering mother Claire wrote about. I would no longer be available every time he needed something. I would no longer be his personal ATM or his emergency cook. The first test came 2 weeks later, when Michael called as if nothing had happened. "Mom, could you make me that lasagna that Claire loves so much? Her parents are coming for dinner, and I want to impress them with a home-cooked meal." For the first time in 30 years, I said no. "I'm sorry, Michael, but I can't. I have other plans." The silence on the other end of the line was so long I thought the call had been disconnected. "Other plans?" he repeated. His tone of disbelief would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. "What kind of plans could you possibly have?" "My own," I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. "I'm no longer available every time you need me, especially after you didn't care if I was dead or alive during my illness." "What are you talking about? It was just a flu. A flu that could have killed me, and you didn't even call to check on me." "Claire told me it was better to give you space to recover without pressure," he lied shamelessly. "Claire says, Claire thinks, Claire believes." I finally exploded. "When are you going to start thinking for yourself, Michael? When are you going to remember you have a mother who loves you?" "Don't start with your drama," he yelled back. "If you don't want to help me with a simple meal, that's fine. But don't come at me with emotional blackmail." He hung up violently, leaving me trembling, but, for the first time in months, feeling something akin to relief. The next few days were strange. On one hand, I felt guilty for denying my son something, but on the other, I experienced a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to watch the phone, waiting for his sporadic calls. I didn't have to emotionally prepare myself for his cold, calculated visits. For the first time in a long time, my house was truly my own. I used that freedom to reconnect with Betty and a few other neighbors I had neglected during my years of obsessing over Michael. I started taking walks in the afternoons, tending to my small garden, reading the books I had accumulated but never had time to enjoy. Slowly, very slowly, I began to remember who I was before I became solely Michael's mother. But my son was not willing to accept this new version of me. 3 weeks after our phone altercation, he showed up at my door unannounced, accompanied by Claire, and with an expression of fury I hadn't seen since his teenage years. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Claire followed him, wearing a purple outfit that probably cost more than my monthly salary when I worked at the factory. "Of course, make yourselves comfortable," I said sarcastically, but decided to remain calm. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining what's gotten into you lately," Michael said, sitting on the armchair where he used to curl up as a child for me to read him bedtime stories. "First you hang up on me, then you refuse to help me with a simple meal, and now the neighbors are saying you're bad-mouthing us." "Bad-mouthing you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "What have I supposedly said?" "Betty told her sister, and her sister told the lady at the market, that you said I was an ungrateful son who abandoned his sick mother." Claire intervened with a voice that feigned concern but dripped with venom. "Do you realize the damage that could do to Michael's reputation at work?" I was flabbergasted. It was true I had talked to Betty about my disappointment with Michael, but I never thought my words would travel so far, nor that my son would be more concerned about his reputation than about understanding my feelings. "Your reputation?" I asked Michael directly, ignoring Claire completely. "Is that your biggest concern? Not the fact that your mother felt abandoned when she needed you most?" "Oh, please!" Claire burst out before Michael could respond. "Eleanor, you're 66 years old. It's time you grew up and stopped behaving like a petulant teenager seeking attention." The silence that followed those words was deafening. I looked at my son, waiting for him to finally, after so many humiliations, stand up and defend the woman who had raised him. I waited for him to tell his wife that she had no right to disrespect me in my own home, to remember everything I had sacrificed for him. But Michael remained silent, staring at his shoes like a scolded child. Michael's silence was more painful than any insult Claire could throw at me. In that moment, seeing my 30-year-old son sit there like a coward while his wife attacked me in my own house, I understood that I had definitively lost the boy I had raised with so much love. "I see you have nothing to say," I said directly to Michael, feeling the rage begin to replace the sadness I had carried for months. "I see you're going to let me be disrespected in my own home without lifting a finger to defend me." He finally looked up, but his eyes held no guilt or regret, only annoyance. "Mom, Claire isn't disrespecting you. She's just telling you the truth you need to hear. You can't keep living as if you're the victim of everything." "The victim?" I stood up, feeling all the frustration accumulated over the years begin to boil in my veins. "Am I the victim for expecting a minimum of respect from my own son? For wanting you to care if I was dead or alive when I had a 104-degree fever?" "It was just a flu," he shouted, also getting to his feet. "You couldn't expect me to cancel my entire life for a simple flu." "It wasn't a simple flu. It was your sick and scared mother asking her only son to take her to the doctor," I yelled back, feeling tears of rage roll down my cheeks. "It was the woman who worked double shifts to pay for your college, who mortgaged her house to give you a career, who gave up any chance of being happy so you could have everything you wanted. Nobody asked you to do that." His response hit me like a punch to the gut. "Nobody asked you to sacrifice your life for me. Those were your decisions." For a moment, the world stopped around me. My own son, the man for whom I had given everything, was telling me that my sacrifices had not only been unnecessary, but unwanted, that everything I had done out of love had been a gigantic mistake that he now held against me. "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Nobody asked me to sacrifice my life for you. Those were my decisions. Stupid decisions made by a woman who believed a mother's love meant giving everything and expecting nothing in return. Claire smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of me being destroyed by my own son's words. "I'm glad you finally understand," Michael continued, cruelly encouraged by what he interpreted as my surrender. "Now, maybe you can start living your own life instead of trying to control mine." "Oh, I'm going to live my own life," I assured him, a strange calm washing over me. "In fact, I'm going to start right now." I walked to the small table where I kept my important documents and pulled out the paper I had been avoiding for months, the will I had drafted years ago, in which Michael was the sole beneficiary of everything I owned. "You know what, son?" I said, holding the document in front of him. "You're right. My sacrifices were my decisions I now deeply regret making. But this house, these savings, this inheritance you were going to receive, these are also my decisions." Michael's eyes fixed on the paper with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What are you doing?" "I'm making a new decision," I replied, walking over to the paper shredder I had recently bought to get rid of old documents. "I'm deciding that I no longer want a son who despises me to inherit anything from the stupid woman who sacrificed everything for him." "Mom, wait!" he shouted, lunging toward me as I slowly fed the will into the machine. But it was too late. The document disintegrated into thin strips that fell into the bin like confetti celebrating my liberation. "What did you just do?" Claire asked, her sharp voice betraying her real concern for the first time. Until that moment, she had been just the cruel wife enjoying the family drama, but now she realized she had just lost a considerable inheritance. "I just did what my son asked me to do," I replied with a smile that came from my soul. "I just stopped making decisions based on a love that is clearly not reciprocated." Michael was pale, staring at the remains of the will as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. "Mom, you can't. You can't do that. This house, your savings. I'm your only son." "Exactly," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You are my only son, and you just told me that all my sacrifices for you were mistakes that nobody asked for. So now, I'm going to correct those mistakes." "You're crazy," Claire yelled, completely losing her composure. "You can't disinherit your own son just because you had an argument." "An argument?" I looked at her with a calm that astonished me. "Claire, dear, this isn't an argument. This is the result of months of humiliation, contempt, and abandonment. This is what happens when you treat someone like dirt for so long that they finally decide they deserve better." "Mom, please," Michael pleaded, approaching me with his hands outstretched as if trying to calm a wild animal. "You're acting on impulse. You're angry and you're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," I replied, backing away from him. "For the first time in years, I am thinking with perfect clarity. I'm realizing that raising an ungrateful son was my biggest mistake, but it doesn't have to be my permanent one." "You can't talk to your mother like that," Claire yelled at Michael, but no longer from a place of moral superiority, but from the panic of seeing a fortune disappear before her eyes. "Say something, fix this." The irony was delicious. The same woman who had spent years poisoning my son against me, who had encouraged every one of his cruelties, was now demanding that he treat me well because their financial future was at stake. "How interesting," I said, watching the growing desperation on both of their faces. "For months, Claire, you've been telling my son that I was a toxic, controlling mother who needed to learn to be alone. And now that I'm finally taking your advice, you realize it might not have been such a good idea after all." "Eleanor, I never, ever said those things." She lied shamelessly, but her trembling voice betrayed her. "Of course you did. And my son, instead of defending himself or his mother, chose to believe every one of your venomous words. He chose to treat me like a nuisance instead of the woman who gave him life and paid for the education he now uses to earn the money you both love to spend." Michael sank back into the armchair, his head in his hands. For a moment, just one moment, I saw a flash of the vulnerable boy he used to be, and my heart almost broke. Almost. "Mom," he said in a small voice, "I know I've been difficult lately. I know maybe I haven't been the son you expected. But you can't punish me like this. We're family." "Family?" I repeated the word as if hearing it for the first time. "Do you know what that word means, Michael? It means being there when the other person needs you. It means mutual respect. It means not allowing anyone, not even your wife, to humiliate the person who gave you life. I can change, he mumbled. But his words sounded hollow even to himself. No, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. I'm no longer interested in whether you can change. I'm no longer interested in being the mother who begs for scraps of affection from a son who clearly despises me. I've decided I deserve better than that. But we're your only family, Claire cried, now playing the emotional blackmail card she had so often criticized when it came from me. No, I smiled at her, a sweetness that contrasted brutally with my words. You were my family. Now you are two strangers who came into my house to disrespect me and lay claim to an inheritance you will no longer receive. You can't do this, Claire shrieked, completely losing the mask of sophistication she had always worn with me. That house is worth over $300,000. Your savings are our future. I listened to her talk about our future as if my money, the money I had earned sewing for 40 years, was something that belonged to them by divine right. The woman who for years had treated me like an ignorant peasant was now claiming my inheritance with the desperation of someone who had just seen her life plan vanish. Interesting, I said, crossing my arms. So now, my savings are your future. The same woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up is now here demanding the money of that dramatic old woman. Michael shot to his feet, an expression on his face I had never seen before. It was a mixture of panic, rage, and something that looked dangerously like a threat. Mom, you're going to reverse this right now, he said in a low, controlled voice that reminded me of his father in his worst moments. You're going to call your lawyer, and you're going to make a new will where I am your sole heir. Or what? I asked, feeling a strange calm in the face of his threatening posture. What are you going to do if I don't, Michael? Or you're going to find out what it means to be truly alone, he replied, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps. Do you think anyone is going to take care of you when you're a helpless old woman? Do you think you'll be able to keep this house when you're 80 and can't even walk? His words were like daggers, but they no longer hurt me as they once did. The woman who had endured months of humiliation had died in the last 20 minutes. In her place, someone stronger had been born, someone who finally understood her own worth. I would rather die alone in a nursing home than continue living as the emotional slave of a son who despises me, I replied with a serenity that unnerved him. I would rather strangers take my money than give it to someone who treats me like garbage. Are you crazy? Marlene screamed again. Completely insane. Michael, do something. Your mother has lost her mind. I haven't lost my mind, I answered, heading for the front door. I've found it, and now I'm going to ask you both to kindly get out of my house. We're not leaving until you fix this madness, Michael declared, planting himself in the middle of the living room as if he owned the place. Then I'll have to call the police to explain the concept of trespassing to you, I replied, walking toward the phone. Don't you dare, he shouted, snatching the receiver from my hand with a violence that frightened me. For the first time in this confrontation, I felt a flash of real fear. The man standing in front of me was no longer my son. He was a desperate stranger, capable of anything to protect what he considered his. Give me back that phone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Not until you come to your senses, he replied, holding the device out of my reach. You're going to sit down, you're going to calm down, and we're going to talk about this like civilized adults. Like civilized adults, I laughed, a hysteria bordering on madness. You're going to lecture me about being civilized? The man who just snatched the phone from his 66-year-old mother? It's for your own good, he shouted, and in that moment, I saw Claire's influence completely. Those were words she had used with me many times, always justifying her cruelties as acts of tough love. My own good, I repeated, feeling the last fiber of motherly love snap definitively in my chest. For 30 years, everything you've done against me has been for my own good. Marrying a woman who hates me was for my own good. Abandoning me when I was sick was for my own good. Humiliating me in my own house is for my own good. Claire approached us, that fake smile I knew so well plastered on her face. Eleanor, dear, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand that Michael only wants what's best for you. We all want what's best for you. I looked at her with an incredulity that was almost comical. You want what's best for me? The woman who spent 2 years poisoning my son against me? The woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up? That was just frustration of the moment. She lied pathetically. You know we care for you very much. You care for me. I repeated her words as if they were a particularly funny joke. You care for me so much that my son didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when I was sick. You care for me so much that you come to my house to demand I reverse a decision I made about my own money. Michael moved closer, still holding the phone out of my reach. Mom, listen to me carefully. You are going to make a new will. You are going to leave me this house and your savings, and we are going to forget about this ridiculous conversation. Or what? I asked him again, but this time with a smile that visibly disturbed him. Or you're going to find out what it is to be completely alone, he threatened. Without a son, without money, without anyone who cares about you. Michael, I said, stepping toward him until our faces were inches apart, I am already completely alone. I've already discovered what it's like to have a son who doesn't care about me. The difference is that now, finally, I've decided to do something about it. Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because for the first time since this confrontation began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. What do you mean by that? I mean that you two are going to get out of my house right now, and you are never coming back. I mean that I'm changing the locks tomorrow. I mean that I'm going to make a new will where all my money goes to charities that help single mothers, so that no other woman makes the mistake of sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son. You can't do that, they both shouted in unison, a chorus of greed and desperation. I can and I will, I assured them. And if you ever think of bothering me again, I will call the police and I will tell them exactly what kind of people you are. I'll tell them how you treated an elderly woman, how you threatened her in her own home, how you snatched the phone from her when she tried to call for help. Michael stared at me for a long moment, and for an instant, I thought that maybe, finally, he was going to react like the son I had raised. I thought he would give me back the phone, apologize, remember who I was to him. Instead, he threw the phone against the wall with such force that it shattered, filling my living room with broken plastic and mangled wires. There's your phone, he said with a cruel smile that chilled my blood. Let's see you call the police now. The silence that followed was absolute. The three of us stared at the remains of the phone scattered on the floor as if it were a perfect metaphor for what was left of our family relationship. Michael, I said, my voice strangely calm even to my own ears. You just crossed a line from which there is no return. Oh yeah, he challenged, puffing out his chest like a street thug. And what are you going to do about it, Mom? You have no phone. You have no one to help you. You are completely at our mercy. Claire smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of me finally being subdued and humiliated, just as she had planned for so long. What neither of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I stared at the fragments of the phone for several seconds, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't fear I felt anymore, nor sadness, not even anger. It was something much more dangerous. An absolute calm, the serenity of someone who has finally seen the true nature of the people in front of them. You know what, Michael? I said, bending down to pick up one of the largest pieces of the shattered phone. You're right. I have no phone. I have no one to help me. I am completely at your mercy. His smile widened, interpreting my words as a surrender. I'm glad you finally understand the situation. Oh, I understand it perfectly, I continued, holding the fragment of broken plastic as if it were a precious relic. I understand that my own son just destroyed my only means of communication with the outside world. I understand that he is threatening me in my own home. I understand that his wife is here enjoying every second of my humiliation. Claire approached, wearing the triumphant expression she had been waiting so long to show me. Now maybe you can be reasonable, Eleanor. Making that new will is the only smart thing you can do in this situation. You're right, I replied, dropping the piece of phone. That's exactly what I'm going to do. The two of them exchanged a look of satisfaction, believing they had finally broken me. They had no idea that what had just broken was not my will, but the last chains of love that tied me to them. Perfect, Michael said, relaxing his shoulders. I knew you'd come to your senses. We'll go to the lawyers tomorrow and sort all this out. Tomorrow, I repeated, nodding slowly. Of course, tomorrow. And in the meantime, Claire added with that venomous smile, perhaps you should reflect on how you've been behaving lately. A little humility would do you good. Humility? I murmured. Yes, I definitely need more humility. Michael headed for the door, clearly pleased with the outcome of his intimidation. We're leaving now, but we'll be back for you early tomorrow, and you'd better be ready to cooperate. Of course, I assured them, following them to the exit. I'll be completely ready. Claire paused in the doorway and looked at me with that perfected condescension. Eleanor, I know this has been difficult for you, but one day you'll thank us for opening your eyes. Sometimes, tough love is the only thing that works. Tough love, I repeated her words. Yes, I definitely need to learn more about tough love. They left without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in my house with the remains of my phone and something much more important, absolute clarity about who the people who had just walked out my door really were. I waited until I heard the sound of their car driving away before I moved. Then, with a calm that surprised me, I went to my bedroom and pulled out the cell phone I had secretly bought 3 months ago from under the mattress. After realizing I needed a way to communicate that Michael didn't know about, I dialed the number of Betty, my neighbor. Betty? It's Eleanor. Could you come over to my house? I need your help with something urgent. 20 minutes later, Betty was sitting in my living room, staring at the remains of the phone with an expression of absolute horror. Eleanor, this is very serious. Your own son threatened you and destroyed your phone. We have to call the police. No, I said, pouring her a cup of tea with perfectly steady hands. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? This is domestic abuse. It's intimidation. You can't let them treat you like this. I'm not going to let them, I assured her. But I'm going to handle this my way. Betty studied me with her wise eyes, trying to understand what I was thinking. What do you have in mind? They think they've broken me, I explained, a strange smile forming on my lips. They think that tomorrow I'm going to go like an obedient lamb to make a new will leaving them all my money. And you're not going to do it. Oh yes, I am, I said, my smile widening. But it's not going to be the will they're expecting. I explained my plan to Betty, who at first tried to dissuade me, insisting it was too risky. But when I told her all the details of how they had treated me over the last few months, when she saw the remains of the phone and truly understood what had happened that afternoon, her expression changed completely. Are you sure you want to do this? She finally asked. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. For 30 years I've let them treat me badly for fear of losing my son's love. But today, I realized that love was lost a long time ago. What's left isn't love. It's habit, convenience, and greed. Betty nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? I need you to be my witness, I said. I need you to see exactly how they behave with me, so that when this is all over, you can testify to what really happened. I couldn't sleep that night, but it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from the strange sense of freedom I was experiencing. For the first time in decades, I was going to take complete control of my life. I was going to show Michael and Claire that they had completely underestimated the woman they thought they had tamed. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I called the lawyer who had drafted my original will. I explained that I needed to make some urgent changes and asked him to come to my house that morning before Michael and Claire arrived. Are you sure about these changes, Mrs. Miller? The lawyer asked after reviewing the new instructions I had given him. They are quite drastic. Completely sure, I confirmed, signing each page with a determination I hadn't felt in years. And I want it to be absolutely clear that I am making these decisions of sound mind, without coercion of any kind. Understood. The documents will be filed immediately. At 10 o'clock in the morning, just as they had promised, I heard Michael's car pull up in front of my house. Betty was hidden in the kitchen, from where she could hear everything that happened in the living room. My cell phone was recording, hidden among the sofa cushions. I opened the door before they knocked, with a perfectly acted expression of resignation. Good morning, I said in a submissive voice. I was waiting for you. Michael entered with the conqueror's arrogance he had shown the night before. Perfect. I see a night of reflection helped you understand things. Yes, I murmured, keeping my gaze low. I understood perfectly. Claire studied me with suspicion, as if sensing something wasn't quite right, But the defeated woman act I was performing seemed to convince her. "Did you call the lawyer?" Michael asked. "He already came," I informed them. "The new will is already done." The two exchanged a look of absolute triumph. They had won, or so they thought. "Excellent," Claire said, sitting on my sofa as if she owned the house. "And what does it say exactly?" I showed them a copy of the document, watching their eyes light up as they read the first few lines. What they didn't know was that what they held in their hands was a fake copy, prepared specifically for this moment. "Perfect," Michael murmured, reading about his complete inheritance. "I knew you'd come to your senses." "Yes," I said, feeling the adrenaline start to course through my veins. "I came completely to my senses." "Now that this is settled," Claire said, tucking the fake copy of the will into her purse like a trophy, "we need to talk about some other practical matters." "What kind of matters?" I asked, perfectly maintaining my act of a submissive, defeated woman. "Well," Michael intervened, settling into the armchair as if he were the new owner of the house, "now that we know this property will eventually be ours, Claire and I have been thinking that maybe it would be better if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling the rage begin to boil in my veins but keeping my voice calm. "Yes, Mom. A place where you can get the care you need. An assisted living facility, perhaps. Something with medical staff available 24 hours a day." Claire nodded enthusiastically. "We've been looking into some very nice options. Places where you can socialize with people your own age, where you won't have to worry about maintaining this big house." "I see," I murmured, clenching my fists behind my back. "And when would I have to make this transition?" "Well," Michael said, exchanging another knowing glance with his wife, "we were actually thinking the sooner, the better. This house needs some major renovations if we're going to sell it for what it's really worth." "Sell it?" I looked at them with feigned confusion. "But I thought you wanted it for yourselves." "Oh no," Claire replied with a laugh that made my teeth grind. "This house is too old, too small for our needs. But the land is excellent, great location. With the right renovations, or better yet, tearing it down and building something modern, we could get almost $700,000. There it was. The complete, ruthless truth. Not only did they want to kick me out of my own home, but they planned to erase every trace of the life I had built here, every memory of the years I had spent raising my son within these walls. $700,000, I repeated slowly. "That's a lot of money." "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "And with your savings, which according to the will amount to $150,000, we'd be looking at over $500,000. That's enough for Claire and me to buy our dream house in the best neighborhood in the city." "Your dream house," I murmured, each word like a slap. "And me? Where do I fit into these dreams?" "You'll be perfectly cared for at the facility," Claire assured me with that perfected condescension. "You'll have everything you need. Food, a roof over your head, medical care. What more can a woman your age ask for? What more can she ask for? Maybe respect, maybe gratitude. Maybe for the son I sacrificed my entire life, for not to treat me like an old piece of furniture to be disposed of." "And when would all of this be ready?" I asked, still keeping up my act. "Actually," Michael said, looking at his wife as if for permission to continue, "we've already made some calls. There's a very nice facility on the outskirts of the city that has an immediate opening. We could take you tomorrow to see it." Tomorrow. The speed with which they had organized my banishment left me breathless. "Isn't that a bit rushed?" "Mom," Michael said with the forced patience one uses with difficult children, "the longer we wait, the harder it will be for you to adjust. It's better to make the change quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid." Like ripping off a Band-Aid. That was the metaphor my son had chosen to describe the moment he would uproot me from my home, my memories, everything that had been my world for 4 decades. "Besides," Claire added, "we've already contacted some contractors to come and evaluate the property. One of them can come next week, but we need the house to be available." "Available?" I repeated. "Without me in it." "Exactly," she confirmed with a smile that made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. I stood in silence for several minutes, pretending to process all the information they had given me. In reality, I was savoring every second of this conversation, recording every cruel word, every ruthless plan, every display of the greed and contempt they had been hiding behind their masks of filial concern. "You know what?" I said finally, rising from the sofa with deliberately slow movements. "I think you're right. I think it's time I accepted the reality of my situation." The two of them visibly relaxed, interpreting my words as the total surrender they had been seeking. "I'm glad to hear you say that," Michael said, also standing up. "I know it's difficult, but you'll be happier this way in the end." "Happier," I nodded. "Yes, I'm definitely going to be happier." "So we'll go see the facility tomorrow?" Claire asked, already pulling out her phone to make some kind of arrangement. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "But first, there's something I need to show you. Something important I found when I was organizing my things for the move." "What is it?" Michael asked with sudden interest. "It's in the basement," I explained, heading for the door that led to the stairs. "It's something that belonged to your grandfather, something I thought you'd like to have as a family keepsake." Curiosity got the better of any caution they might have had. They both followed me down to the basement, descending the wooden stairs that creaked under our feet. The basement of my house was a place Michael had avoided for years. As a child, he had an irrational fear of dark, enclosed spaces, and as an adult, he had simply decided he had no reason to go down there. What he didn't know was that I had turned that space into my private sanctuary, the place where I kept all my most precious memories and a few other items I had been collecting over the years. "It's a little dark," I said, turning on the stairway light but leaving the rest of the basement in shadow. "Watch your step." We reached the bottom of the stairs and I switched on the main light. The basement lit up, revealing what I had been preparing for months without their knowledge. "What is all this?" Claire asked, looking around with a mixture of confusion and alarm. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, but they weren't normal family memories. They were evidence. Photographs of the bruises left after the times Michael had pushed me during our arguments. Copies of bank statements showing all the loans he had never repaid. Recordings of conversations where he and Claire spoke contemptuously of me, thinking I couldn't hear them. "This is my archive," I explained, with a calm that contrasted brutally with the growing panic on their faces. "Everything you've done, everything you've said, everything you've planned, it's all here." Michael walked over to one of the walls, reading some of the documents with a pallor that gave me immense satisfaction. "Mom, what is this? Why? Why did I document everything?" I finished his question. "Because I knew that eventually I would need proof of who you two really are." Claire had found the transcripts of some of her cruelest phone conversations. Conversations I had secretly recorded over the last few months. "This is illegal," she shouted, holding the papers with trembling hands. "You can't record private conversations." "Actually, I can," I informed her. "In my own home, I have the right to record any conversation. And considering I was documenting emotional and financial abuse, any court would find it completely justified." The silence in the basement was deafening. Michael and Claire moved between the evidence-covered walls like zombies, reading transcripts of conversations where they had planned my future without consulting me, looking at photographs that documented every humiliation, every moment of contempt they had made me suffer. "This over here," I said, pointing to a particular section of the wall, "is all the times you asked me for money and never paid back a single cent. In total, you owe me $47,000. Michael approached the documents, his face growing paler by the second. "Mom, those weren't loans. They were family help." "Family help." I laughed with a bitterness that came from my soul. "Is that what you call theft now? Because I have recordings of you here promising me you would pay back every cent." Claire had found the most compromising photographs, images of her going through my drawers without permission during her visits, documents proving she had been investigating the value of my property without my knowledge, even screenshots of her text messages making fun of me with her friends. "How did you get this?" she asked, her voice trembling with pure rage. "Your mistake, Claire dear, was completely underestimating the dramatic old woman you thought you had tamed," I replied. "Turns out this old woman learned how to use security cameras, recording apps, and many other modern tools during the months you thought she was losing her mind." In the center of the basement was a table with something neither of them had noticed until that moment, an open laptop with an active video call. "What is that?" Michael asked, approaching the screen. "Oh, that," I said with a smile that came from my heart. That's my life insurance. For the last 20 minutes, everything we have talked about up here and down here has been broadcast live to several very important people. The screen showed multiple video windows, a lawyer specializing in elder abuse, a social worker, Betty from my kitchen, and, to my ultimate satisfaction, Mark, my neighbor, who worked as an investigative journalist for the local newspaper. "Eleanor," the lawyer exclaimed from the screen. "Are you okay? Do you need us to call the police?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, never taking my eyes off the faces of absolute horror on Michael and Claire. "In fact, I've never felt better." "Turn that off!" Claire screamed, lunging for the computer. But I was faster and snapped it shut before she could reach it. "Too late," I informed her. "Everything is already recorded and saved in multiple locations. Your plans to put me in a home, your comments about demolishing my house, your confession about the $700,000 you expect to make from my property. Everything." Michael sank into an old chair I had in the basement, his head in his hands. "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "Protected myself from you two." "You can't use any of this," Claire yelled, waving the papers she had been reading. "They're private conversations. It's an invasion of privacy." "My dear," I said with infinite patience, "documenting abuse is not an invasion of privacy. It's survival." I walked over to another section of the wall, where I had hung something that filled them with even greater terror: copies of recent legal documents. "These here are particularly interesting," I continued. "They are the lawsuits I'll be filing next week. One for financial elder abuse, another for intimidation and threats, and this last one for property damage for the phone you destroyed yesterday." "You're crazy," Michael yelled, jumping to his feet. "I'm your son. You can't sue your own son." "My son?" I looked at him with a coldness that made him recoil. "My son died months ago, Michael. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who threatens me, destroys my property, plans to steal my inheritance, and put me in a home against my will." Tears started to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of justice, of a satisfaction I had been waiting too long to feel. "But that's not all," I continued, moving toward the most important document of all. "This here is my favorite." I showed them a copy of the real will, the one I had signed that morning with the lawyer. "Remember the will I showed you upstairs? It was a fake. This is the real one." Michael snatched the document from my hands, reading it with a desperation that gave me more pleasure than I had felt in years. "This can't be," he murmured, reading line by line. "You can't have done this." "What does it say?" Claire asked, trying to read over her husband's shoulder. "It says, I inform them with a radiant smile that all my property and my savings will go to a foundation for single mothers struggling to educate their children. It says that not a single cent will go into the hands of people who treat the elderly like trash." Claire turned completely pale. "You can't do that. We are your family." "My family?" I laughed until my ribs ached. "My family doesn't threaten me. My family doesn't plan to put me in a home so they can sell my house. My family doesn't destroy my things when they don't get what they want." "Mom, please," Michael pleaded, and for the first time in months, I saw something that resembled the son I had raised. "I know we've been difficult with you, but I didn't know you felt this way." "You didn't know?" I snatched the will from his hands. "You didn't know when you hung up on me while I had a fever? You didn't know when you allowed your wife to insult me in my own home? You didn't know when you threatened to leave me completely alone if I didn't do what you wanted?" I was just frustrated," he stammered. "I didn't mean those things. But you said them, and you meant them. And for months, you treated me as if I were a nuisance you had to tolerate until you could finally get rid of me." Claire had started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure rage and frustration at seeing her perfect plan crumble before her eyes. "This isn't over," she shouted. "We'll contest that will. We'll prove you're not of sound mind." "Go ahead," I said, stepping toward her until we were face to face. "Try to prove I'm not of sound mind. Try to explain to a judge why a woman who meticulously documented months of abuse and neglect doesn't have the right to decide what to do with her own money." The silence that followed was absolute. They both finally understood that they had lost, that their greed and cruelty had been their undoing. Besides, I added, heading for the stairs, you forget that all of this is going to be in the newspaper next week. Mark already has all the material he needs to write a very interesting article about elder abuse in middle-class families. Your names, your photographs, your own words describing your plans for me. You can't do that, Michael yelled, following me up the stairs. That will ruin my career. You should have thought of that before you threatened your mother, I replied without looking back. We reached the main floor of the house, where Betty was waiting for us with a look of absolute satisfaction on her face. How did it go? She asked, though the devastated expressions on Michael and Claire's faces had already given her the answer. Perfectly, I replied. I think our guests are ready to leave now. Michael and Claire stood in my living room like statues, processing the magnitude of what had just happened to them. All their arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperation that would have made me pity them if I hadn't been savoring every second of their destruction. Mom, Michael said in a broken voice I hadn't heard since he was a child, there has to be a way to fix this. We're family. We can find a solution. A solution? I looked at him with a calm that contrasted brutally with his panic. The only solution was for you to treat me like a human being. You had that chance for months, and you wasted it every single day. Claire had started pacing in circles, muttering to herself about lawyers and legal options, completely unable to accept that they had been defeated by the dramatic old woman they had so underestimated. Eleanor, she finally said, trying to regain some of her former composure, I know we've had our differences, but this is too extreme. You're destroying your own family. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. You two destroyed this family the day you decided my love was a burden and my money was your right. I'm just documenting the destruction you already caused. Betty stepped closer to me and put a protective hand on my shoulder. Eleanor, I think it's time for them to go. The police are on their way to take a formal report about the intimidation and the broken phone. The police? Michael turned even paler. Mom, please, don't do this. My job, my reputation, it will all be ruined. Your reputation, I repeated his words with genuine disbelief. To the very end, all you care about is your reputation. Not the pain you caused me. Not the years I wasted loving you unconditionally. Just your precious reputation. It's not just that, he shouted, and for a moment I saw a flash of the violent temper he had shown the day before. It's my whole life, my career, everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I murmured, glancing out the window where I could see the flashing lights of a police car approaching down the street. You mean the career I paid for with my savings? The job you got thanks to the education I financed by working double shifts? The sound of the sirens grew louder, and both Michael and Claire instinctively moved toward the door, like frightened animals seeking an escape. Don't leave just yet, I said with a smile that must have been terrifying. I want you to stay and meet the officers. I want you to explain personally why you thought threatening a 66-year-old woman was a good idea. The police knocked on the door at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 2 young officers listened to my story with a seriousness that filled me with satisfaction. Betty corroborated everything she had witnessed, and the audio recordings I had made were accepted as preliminary evidence. Ma'am, one of the officers said after taking all the information, do you want to press formal charges against your son and daughter-in-law? I looked at Michael, who was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands, completely defeated. For a second, just a second, I felt a flicker of the motherly love that had defined my life for so many years. Then I remembered his words from the day before. Nobody asked you to sacrifice your life for me. I remembered the cruel smile with which he had destroyed my phone. I remembered the plans they had made to put me in a home without consulting me. Yes, I replied to the officer in a firm voice. I want to press formal charges. The legal process that followed was exactly as devastating as I had expected. The local newspapers covered the story in great detail, especially after Mark published his investigative article titled The Cost of Contempt, When Children Become Predators. The company where Michael worked fired him after the scandal reached his supervisors. Claire lost her position at the clinic when the board decided that a person involved in elder abuse was not appropriate for a medical environment. But what gave me the most satisfaction wasn't their professional ruin, but something much simpler and more personal. One afternoon, 3 months after all the legal drama, Michael showed up at my door. He was alone, without Claire, with a defeated expression that would have broken my heart under other circumstances. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I looked at him for a long moment, studying his gaunt face, his deep dark circles, the way he had aged years in just a few weeks. "No," I replied simply. "We can't." "Please," he begged, and tears started to roll down his cheeks. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Claire left me last week. I have nothing. Now you know how it feels," I said with absolute calm. "Now you know what it's like to lose everything because of someone who supposedly loves you. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I know I was terrible to you. I know you didn't deserve any of what we did to you. But I'm your son. There has to be some way to fix this." For a moment, I felt the familiar temptation to comfort him, to open my arms and forgive everything as I had done so many times before. But then I remembered something I had learned during these months of freedom. Forgiveness without consequences isn't love. It's cowardice. "Michael," I said, keeping the door partially open, "for 30 years, I forgave you every cruelty, every slight, every moment you treated me as if I were less important than anything else in your life. I forgave you because I thought that's what loving mothers do." "Exactly," he exclaimed, trying to step closer. "You're my mother. You love me." "I loved you." I corrected him. "I loved the sweet boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. I loved the ambitious young man who promised me that one day he would pay me back for everything I had sacrificed for him. But that boy, that young man, they died a long time ago. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who chose greed over love, who chose cruelty over gratitude. I can change," he cried desperately. "I can be the son you want again." "I don't want you to change for me," I said, beginning to close the door. "If you ever change, let it be for yourself, because you realize that the person you became is despicable. But it's no longer my responsibility to fix you." "Mom, please." He put his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it completely. "You can't abandon me like this. I'm your only son." "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. "You abandoned me. I'm just officially acknowledging something that happened months ago." I gently but firmly pushed his foot away and closed the door. I could hear his sobs on the other side, his pleas, his promises of change that came far too late. I stood on the other side of the door for several minutes, listening as the man who had once been my reason for living completely fell apart on my porch. Part of me wanted to open it, to comfort him, to go back to being the mother who forgave everything. But a stronger part, the part of me that had been reborn in that basement full of evidence, the part that had learned to value herself, stood firm. Finally, I heard his footsteps walking away, the sound of a car starting, and then silence. I went to the kitchen, where Betty was waiting for me with a hot cup of tea and a proud smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I replied, taking the cup with hands that no longer trembled. For the first time in 30 years, I feel completely free. That night, as I prepared for sleep in my house, that no one was ever going to take from me again, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost my only son, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable: my dignity. At 66 years old, I had learned that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. I had learned that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but necessity. I had learned that sometimes the only way to save what's left of your soul is to cut the ties that are destroying you. I gave everything for a son who saw me as a walking ATM. But now, finally, I was going to give everything for the only person who truly deserved it: myself. And for the first time in decades, that prospect didn't scare me. It thrilled me.